Hallo. Alleen een latte macchiato met havermelk, alsjeblieft.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
Okay, English?
Yeah.
I saw an ad for a university the other day. In it, several staff members rave about how easy it is to live and work in the Netherlands without knowing the local language. Oh, I can study and research in English. I can other things in English. I can phone the utilities company and the tax office in English. I get the appeal. It's convenient. But as a YouTuber who bangs on about language threat and power dynamics, that got me thinking, is Dutch itself under any threat? Now, hear me out. Obviously, it's a very healthy national language, yes, but at the same time, the fact remains that the Dutch people are some of the best and most comfortable English speakers there are. On the most extreme end of things, I've heard personal anecdotes about Dutch people raising their kids in English. Sadly, as a Hongkonger, that doesn't even surprise me anymore. Now, that story is most definitely far from the norm, but the Dutch Language Union does foresee the Dutch language eventually becoming a language spoken in the house with the family, having lost its place in the worlds of work, money, science, and technology. Not in the short term for sure, but there is a tendency towards diminishing spaces for the Dutch language, all because Dutch people are too nice. Welcome to Rhapsody in Lingo. My name is Israel and I have experienced learning many wildly different languages, and despite what people say about linguistic similarity, I would actually rank Dutch as one of the hardest languages. Shocker, I know. It's on every list of easiest languages to learn for English speakers. But to me, the deciding factor is not grammar or vocabulary, but rather the one thing that Dutch people are infamous for: speaking English to you. Because they're so good at it, some might even say better than natives, when they interact with foreigners, the path of least resistance always is switching to English. On the one hand, it makes it really easy to move here. On the other hand, that in itself constitutes the first barrier towards promoting the Dutch language. Migrants struggle to practice the language in their everyday lives. And you need to practice to get good, but if you're not good enough, it's difficult to practice. It's like work experience. I don't think anyone will disagree with me that this trait is true. So in this video, we'll entertain the question of whether this could potentially lead to the demise of the language.
And because I haven't lived in the Netherlands, I'll speak to two friends of mine who have moved there.
Ddoes i yma i'r Iseldiroedd i wneud Masters Ieithyddiaeth Indo-Europeig nes i tro yma.
This is Callie, my Welsh friend in the Netherlands.
Yn pa iaith nes di astudio yn Leiden?
Wel, y cwrs angen rheidol i gyd yn Saesneg, ond wedyn oeddet ti'n gallu dewis gwneud rhywbeth trwy gyfrwng yr iaith.
And we'll chat about their first-hand experience and maybe struggles.
We'll look at the question from different perspectives, from the social to the linguistic. And if you like deep dive analyses of unexpected questions,
guys, everyone subscribe to him. Rhapsody in Lingo, the best content.
yep, dankjewel. The area where the impact is most evident is, as you might expect, customer service, especially in touristy areas. I've been to cafes and restaurants in touristy areas in Amsterdam, less touristy areas, and also here in the lesser known city, Arnhem. Oh, so that's the station I've heard so much about. Well, to be fair, my experience might not be the most representative because I look like this and am statistically more likely to be a visitor. But I sat and observed what languages people spoke, which is what I normally do anyway. And it's true, the more touristy an area is, the more likely the staff workers are to open in English. It's not just my experience either, because I've heard other people say that workers wouldn't even hesitate to go to English right away just to make things easier. When I went to a restaurant of a minority culture here in Arnhem, the default language was also English, as you might expect. People always go for the path of least resistance.
The big city is where it's the hardest, says Seen, my Hong Kong friend in Amsterdam. People are busy at minding their own business, so if you struggle to speak Dutch to them, it's like you're getting in their way or putting a burden on them to help you learn. Whatever the language, they'd rather just get it over with.
Ie, maen nhw'n meddwl beth ti'n neud, pam wyt ti'n boddran? Di o ddim fel mynd i Ffrainc neu'r Eidal. Os wyt ti yn mynd mewn i siop a ti ddim yn siarad Iseldireg yn rhugl a ti'n trio, fydden nhw'n edrych arno chdi fel... Dwi'n meddwl bod chdi'n gallu pechu pobl, mae pobl yn meddwl... Ti'n gwybod, dwi'n siarad Saesneg, beth sy'n bod yn...
Gallu swnio'n tipyn bach yn patronising. Nawddoglyd, os ti'n trio siarad eich iaith nhw. Dankjewel.
Surely.
Which might seem obvious to you, but think about the implications. I've had discussions in the comment section of my Wales video talking about switching languages And it might be difficult to switch out of the common language even if you speak the other language better. Because for one, from my own experience as a polyglot, I can tell you very certainly that switching languages is not easy. There is a brain thing that you have to do and to flip the switch from one to another. It's like going into a different zone altogether. And more importantly, when you're working, when you're doing the same thing all day, you end up developing a sort of script for all the different customer interactions that you use. Would you like chocolate sprinkles? Do you need a bag? Is that everything? That script eventually becomes a trodden path that is really hard to steer out of. It also means that many places in cosmopolitan areas like Amsterdam and Berlin have started hiring people that don't even speak the local language because they don't need it anymore. They can talk to foreigners in English, and locals in those areas tend to speak English without a problem as well. Now, an increased number of foreigners who don't speak the local language doesn't necessarily mean that the local language will be diminished, but it does mean that an increased proportion of interactions, whether professional or casual, whether within foreigners or between a foreigner and a local, will take place in the foreign language, and that proportion may as well continue to rise. So imagine a Dutch person going to a cafe in a cosmopolitan area for the first time and interacting with a new barista. Neither side would be 100% sure the other one speaks the local language unless they have a very clear Dutch accent. So to save time, because it's a busy city, they might as well default to English. So you might end up with two locals speaking a foreign language to each other. It reminds me of Wales, really. When I was there, I could never tell if someone was a Welsh speaker or not, unless I asked them or I knew them already. This phenomenon will likely persist and potentially expand as well. Do I think it will eventually expand to cover the entire country? Personally, no. Establishments in less urban areas have less of a reason to expect non-Dutch speakers to visit. But it's also not outside the realm of imagination that as people move around more, this defaultism could spread. What do you think? Now let's get back to the start, the thing about universities. This is an area where English has basically won. Universities want to compete internationally, which means publishing more research in English, as well as attracting international talent, whether researchers or students. And for the sake of streamlining, some local students also end up studying in English. Currently, around 3 out of 10 bachelor's degrees are taught in English. And if that doesn't surprise you, what about the fact that 3/4 of master's programs are taught in English? Certain institutions, such as the Eindhoven University of Technology, either teach all of the master's courses or just all of their degrees in English.
Os ti'n dod I wneud masters, bod llawer iawn o'r myfyrwyr yn dod o wledydd eraill, a bod yna ddisgwyl bod y cwrs yn cael ei gynnal yn Saesneg. Dwi'n meddwl ar gyfer y bachelors bod rhan fwy o'r myfyrwyr yn dod o'r wlad yma.
Felly mae yna wahaniaeth mawr rhwng y ddwy rad.
Dwi'n meddwl yn gyffredin o bod nhw eisiau atenu myfyrwyr o wledydd eraill, felly maen nhw'n gallu gwneud mwy o bres os ydyn nhw'n cynnal y gwrs yn Saesneg. Ac erbyn hyn, mae yna dipyn o bobl sydd yn cwyno bod yn anheg, bod nhw ddim yn cael y cyfle I astudio yn Iseldireg. Dwi'n meddwl bod rhan fwy o bobl ifanc yn derbyn y ffaith bod rhaid ydyn nhw gallu wneud o'n Saesneg hyd yn oed os nad ydyn nhw'n dewis wneud.
It's not just me being shocked by this, it's also ringing alarm bells in the industry and in the government. It is recognised that the language of education has knock-on effects on the language of the workplace and in wider society. Because of a core characteristic of this linguistic dynamic that we'll discuss later, the more non-speakers enter the workforce, with a renowned Dutch willingness to accommodate in English, the further the workplace will also anglicise. In the past couple of years, the Dutch government introduced the Balanced Internationalisation Act, which requires that 2/3 of the teaching in bachelor's degrees to be in Dutch. That's to say, if 1/3 of the credits in a degree are taught in a foreign language, such as English, the degree itself will be classified as a degree taught in a foreign language.
The Dutch anderstalig onderwijs takes into account different conditions and factors
to determine whether the use of a foreign language in the degree adds value to the teaching. Otherwise, Dutch is the default language, though a bit of backlash meant that the law would only apply to newly proposed degree programs. Will it work? Well, as a relatively small language, though almost any language is a small language in comparison to English, to achieve such a balance is nigh impossible. Any work conducted in Dutch will by default be more easily overlooked by the international academia just by virtue of being less accessible. But if you try to bolster the local academia, let's say by legislation, you risk turning away lots of research talent that could add a lot to it.
Efallai dyna'r rheswm hefyd, jyst achos dyn nhw ddim yn bwriadu aros, felly ddim angen dysgu iaith. Popeth yn Saesneg, mae'n oce. Efallai, os dyn nhw dysgu bachelors, mae'n cymryd 2 o blynyddoedd neu faint, felly mae'n fwy o resymau I ddysgu'r iaith ar gyfer fy bob dydd.
Maybe, just maybe, this is a losing battle. Maybe it's more important to keep Dutch as the social language.
I want to learn, but the environment is not always encouraging. I feel like I'd have more motivation if I had something tangible to grab onto, like a Dutch friend that I really vibe with. Most of my colleagues at work are foreigners as well. Living in the EU brings amazing mobility, but it also makes young people less certain where we'll be in the long term, especially in this ephemeral job market. I'll probably be more motivated if we buy a property or have a kid here. These social opportunities linked to the language shape how much the language means to me, and I don't think I can force it at this stage.
Now, when all is said and done, it all boils down to one thing. It has become too easy for Dutch people to talk to people in English. It could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. I've lived in Sweden, which has a similarly high level of English ability, and it was a common occurrence for an entire group of locals to switch to English when a foreigner joins in without even thinking about it. And they might even be stuck in English for a little bit after the foreigner has left. Obviously, I'm just talking about a general tendency. I'm not talking about everyone here. I personally know some people who will be very happy to help foreigners practice their Dutch. But it's usually a conscious effort rather than the unconscious switch to English to make things easy. That's the thing that me and my friends call the Scandinavian treatment, which of course applies here as well. It's widely accepted to switch to English by default as a form of politeness and courtesy the moment you hear someone's foreign or not from here.
Pan o'ch ti'n astudio yn y Iseldiroedd, ym pa iaith o'ch ti'n cymdeithasu, yn Saesneg neu yn yr Iseldireg?
O'n i'n ffeindio yn eitha anodd gwneud ffrindiau efo pobl Iseldireg, a deud y gwir. Dwi'n meddwl dwi wedi clywed fod yn wahanol mewn dinasoedd eraill. Dwi'n meddwl yn Leiden bod yna split eitha clir rhwng y myfyrwyr rhyngwladol sydd fel arfer yn cymdeithasu yn Saesneg.
A rhai lleol.
Ie, rhai lleol, a bod nhw'n cadw at ei hunan. Dwi wedi clywed bod hynna'n wahanol mewn gwledydd eraill.
Mae yna ddwy gymdeithas wahanol ar wahân.
O'n i'n ffeindio, a deud y gwir, oedd gen I fwy o ffrindiau Eidaleg pan o'n i'n astudio yn Leiden na ffrindiau Iseldireg. O'n i'n ffeindio lot haws gwneud ffrindiau trwy gyfran yr Eidaleg.
Achos ti'n gallu Eidaleg yn da iawn hefyd. Oce. Felly, oes gen ti ffrindiau Iseldireg erbyn hyn? Oce, wel...
Lwcus ar ôl 10 mlynedd.
Oce, ar ôl 10 mlynedd. Oce, sut wnaeth hwnna ddigwydd? Sut wnaeth hwnna dechrau?
Pan nes i ddechrau gweithio, nes i symud tŷ, a mwy sydyn, do'n i ddim yn canol bybl rhyngwladol yna. A doedd yna llai o bobl yn siarad Saesneg, ac wrth gwrs erbyn hyn, dwi ddim yn mynd fyny at bobl a dechrau sgwrs yn Saesneg felly. Ar
y bryd hwn, oedd gen ti ac yn well yn barod, a ynganiad da, a wedyn o'ch ti'n cael ffrindiau newydd, o'ch ti yn y gwaith ac yn cyfarfod pobl newydd, ac yn dechrau'r cysylltiad newydd, perthnasau newydd yn yr Iseldireg, ac wnaeth hynna gweithio.
There is a discussion to be had on whether that is an unconscious strategy to keep foreigners foreign and prevent them from participating in local communities. But what's clear is that switching has become as natural as it is for a child raised bilingually. You hear a different language, or you hear your first language with an accent, something in your brain just clicks, and then you switch to an easier language for everyone without even thinking. Even the environment itself has become a linguistic mix, from advertisements to announcements to public notices to movies. It's really common to use English for special effect. I mean, I was just at a concert where the signs were mainly in English and secondarily in Dutch, and the program notes were entirely in English only. Everything and everyone is perpetually ready to switch between the two languages, which sometimes reduces your opportunities for language immersion. If you look at my videos in Lithuania, you can see that my language learning depends heavily on absorbing things from the environment itself. And so the question now is whether this language fluidity will keep flowing as it does now. it's precisely this fluidity that has had an effect on the Dutch language itself as well. English and Dutch are remarkably similar languages, so it's really frictionless to adopt entire words and structures into Dutch. There's a relatively high level of code mixing, ranging from discourse markers like anyway or swear words to loan words in sectors like tech, business, higher education, youth slang and advertising. You've got loans like computer, manager, meeting, deadline, upgrade, printer, liker, deleter, googler, chiller. You could even lift entire structures and expressions from English wholesale into Dutch. There are collocations that are quickly shifting, like you're supposed to say "en beslissing nemen" to take a decision, but more and more people are saying "en beslissing maken" to make a decision. Similarly, you've got things like contact maken to make contact, as opposed to contact opnemen to take up contact, or an impact maken to make an impact, as opposed to impact hebben to have impact over someone. There are idioms that have been lifted, like in controle zijn to be in control, or dat maakt sense. And yes, they took that entire word from English in that spelling, and it only exists in this expression. You can easily borrow entire phrases and expressions like "het is een ding." So in andere woorden, there are loads of these Anglicisms because they're just so damn easy to translate. Some are accepted, others less so. Maar het ding is, that's just language change. Every language has adopted heaps of foreign words into the language from whichever language was hip at the time. I'm speaking English right now, so I should be the last person to say foreign words kill a language. You could see it as a ship of Theseus kind of thing, but Dutch people will always find new ways to Dutchify the new terms and make it sound more natural. So, aan het eind van de dag, it's still Dutch. Now, this video has been more of a thought exercise. I don't really believe Dutch is in any danger, but I wondered, what if I did? Is there any evidence that suggests this possibility? But over the past few days, I've had a great experience just trying to speak the language. I told some gallery receptionists in Haarlem that I could read Dutch, and they overestimated my abilities and fully switched into the language right away.
Bedankt. Het is een beetje moeilijk. We hebben geprobeerd uit te vinden welke kunstenaar en welke kunstwerk, maar dat is heel veel in de tekst.
Ja, het is moeilijk abstract.
Abstract.
Kunstjargon.
Maar ik hou van de kunst.
I casually said sorry in a Dutch accent to some teenage girls for getting into their way, and they responded, "Het maakt niet uit," without even giving a thought. There were some kids and also a waitress who kept talking Dutch to me until it was abundantly clear that we had reached the extent of my abilities. Hello.
YouTube.
Yes, that's...
Which account?
Which account? Rhapsody in Lingo.
Huh?
Rhapsody in Lingo. Ik spreek veel over talen. ik leer de talen.
Oh, praat u gewoon Nederlands?
Een beetje. Ik versta een beetje meer. Maar ik kan niet spreken.
Seen has had many similar experiences. Sometimes I meet Dutch people who don't often work or socialise in an international setting, and they actually keep speaking Dutch to me despite my limited abilities. And they only switch when it's apparent that I can't continue the conversation anymore.
So none of the see this face and switch instantaneously that you might expect, or that I've heard so much about, could be a pronunciation thing.
Wel, dwi'n meddwl, pan o ti'n dechrau dysgu Iseldireg, bod hi'n bwysig iawn ymarfer yr ynganiad. Dwi'n meddwl yn ddilys yn bwysig, achos os oes gen ti ynganiad rhyfedd, os ydy o'n amlwg i bobl bod chdi yn dysgu, fydden nhw'n ymateb yn Saesneg yn syth.
Now, I've been speaking from an outsider perspective, from observations and from data. But at the core, this is a question of balance. Balance between being good at a foreign language and not letting it take over your native. And you know what? That's the kind of thing I do on the daily. Polyglots dedicate their everyday lives to engaging in activities in each of the languages just to give them attention evenly and maintain their skills. Or if you look at my English and my native Cantonese, as a UK resident, I'm also struggling to maintain this balance. We only have so much brain space and, more importantly, time and attention. Now imagine this same struggle, but on a countrywide scale and among non-language nerds.
Dwi ddim yn siŵr os dyna rhywbeth ymwybodol neu anymwybodol.
Ie.
Beth ydych
Dwi'n
meddwl?
meddwl bod yn dibynnu efo pwy ti'n siarad.
Ocê.
Dwi'n meddwl bod rhai pobl yn falch bod chdi'n trio dysgu iaith nhw. Ond,
Y cwestiwn ydy faint o bobl sy'n fach, neu
Ie.
faint sydd just yn... Dwi ddim yn ots, dwi
ond
jyst
dwi'n
eisiau...
meddwl bod, rhai pobl yn ffeindio fo'n embarrassing os ydyn clywed rhywun efo acen rhyfedd.
Second-hand cringe. Dwi ddim bach.
Ie, yn union.
But on a table of Dach, we can't really prophesize the future. Unlike some of the other languages I've covered here, Dutch is scarcely under any threat of replacement or endangerment. Especially compared to the local languages here, it's a strong and healthy national language, even if the nation is relatively small, and it's not like there's a government trying to stamp it out.
Seen is going through the naturalization process, and she tells me that, in fact, the government is expected to raise the language requirement for citizenship to B1. Make of that what you will. When asked to reflect on her experience of naturalization, she says, "The fact that you don't have to speak Dutch to be able to build a life here is a very attractive factor about moving here as a foreigner. The flip side is that people need to take more personal initiative in learning the language. This totally fits with the individualistic mentality of the Dutchies."
What we can't deny is that the high levels of English ability have meant that the Dutch people are relatively in tune with the English-speaking world. Will that eventually tip the balance and turn Dutch culture into an extension of Anglophone culture? Probably not. At least not in the near future. But it's not like something like this hasn't happened before.
But more importantly, is it still worth learning Dutch? Of course, I don't speak it personally, but it's a beautiful language, even if native speakers never say so, with a lot of fun quirks and sayings. And especially if you live in a country, it greatly enriches your experience of the culture and, of course, its basic respect. Too bad it's going to be underwater in like the next decade. If you also want to practice speaking future Atlantean, check out the video where I broke down how I improved my speaking at each level. And if you like me talking about power dynamics and this kind of thing, I made a much more in-depth and even more emotional documentary about Quebec French right here, mainly because I don't get to go to Canada often. I'll see you in one of them. Bye. That's finished. Can enjoy my life now.